Captain Sarah Chen had always been different. At 28 years old, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with short black hair and calloused hands that told stories of years spent working on aircraft engines. Most people who saw her walking around Nellis Air Force Base assumed she was part of the maintenance crew. They weren't entirely wrong, but they weren't entirely right either. Sarah had grown up in a small town in Nevada, where her father ran an auto repair shop. From the time she could hold a wrench, she was underneath cars with him, learning how engines worked, how to fix what was broken, and most importantly, how to make things run better than they ever had before. When other kids her age were playing video games or hanging out at the mall, Sarah was rebuilding transmissions and fine-tuning carburetors. Her fascination with machines led her to study aerospace engineering in college. She excelled in her classes, but what really caught the attention of her professors was her practical knowledge. While other students could solve complex equations on paper, Sarah could look at an engine and immediately spot problems that others missed. She had an intuitive understanding of how aircraft worked that couldn't be taught in textbooks. After graduation, Sarah joined the Air Force with dreams of becoming a pilot. However, the road wasn't easy. The selection process for fighter pilots was incredibly competitive, and despite her excellent test scores and physical fitness, she faced skepticism from some instructors who doubted whether someone so small could handle the physical demands of flying high-performance aircraft. Sarah proved them wrong during training. She had lightning-fast reflexes and an almost supernatural ability to understand her aircraft systems. While other trainees struggled with the complex controls and multiple systems of modern fighters, Sarah seemed to merge with her plane. She could feel when something was wrong with the engine before the instruments showed it. She could push her aircraft to its limits while keeping it perfectly balanced and controlled. Despite her obvious skills, Sarah faced an uphill battle throughout her training. Some of her fellow trainees whispered that she only made it through because the Air Force needed to meet diversity quotas. Others assumed she would wash out when things got really tough. Sarah ignored the whispers and focused on her flying. Every simulation, every training flight, every test became an opportunity to prove that she belonged in the cockpit. When Sarah finally earned her wings and was assigned to the 64th Aggressor Squadron at Nellis, she thought the hard part was over. The Aggressor Squadron was responsible for training other pilots by acting as enemy aircraft in combat exercises. It was challenging work that required exceptional flying skills and tactical knowledge. Sarah was excited to finally put her training to real use. However, even at her new assignment, the assumptions about her role continued. When she walked around the base in her flight suit, civilians and even some junior airmen often mistook her for a mechanic or technician. Her small stature and her habit of checking aircraft systems personally before flights reinforced these misconceptions. Sarah had learned early in her career that knowing her aircraft inside and out was crucial for survival, so she always performed her own pre-flight inspections with the thoroughness of an experienced mechanic. The mistake was understandable. Most fighter pilots relied heavily on their ground crews for aircraft maintenance and preparation. They would walk out to their planes, perform a quick external inspection, and trust that everything had been properly serviced. Sarah was different. She would spend an extra 30 minutes before each flight checking systems that most pilots never even thought about. She would run her hands along the aircraft's surfaces, listening to the engines with the trained ear of someone who had spent years understanding how machines communicated their problems. Her squadron mates initially found her behavior odd, but they quickly learned to respect her thoroughness when she caught several potentially dangerous mechanical issues that might have been missed otherwise. Her attention to detail had already prevented 2 potential accidents in her first 6 months with the squadron. On this particular morning in late September, Sarah arrived at the flight line earlier than usual. She had a full day of training missions ahead, including a large-scale exercise involving multiple squadrons. As she walked toward her assigned F-35 Lightning II, she noticed several people she didn't recognize standing near the aircraft. They were wearing civilian clothes and had visitor badges, which usually meant they were either contractors or VIPs getting a tour of the base. Sarah approached her aircraft and began her usual detailed inspection. She ran her hands along the leading edges of the wings, checked the landing gear, and peered into the engine intakes. The civilians watched her with mild interest, probably assuming they were observing a dedicated maintenance worker preparing the aircraft for its pilot. One of the civilians, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, eventually walked over to her. "Excuse me, miss," he said in a condescending tone. "When do you think the pilot will arrive? We're supposed to observe the pre-flight procedures." Sarah looked up from where she was checking the aircraft's external sensors. She was used to this kind of interaction, and she had learned that correcting people's assumptions often led to awkward moments that weren't worth the trouble. "The pilot should be here soon," she replied diplomatically, not bothering to mention that she was looking right at the pilot. The man nodded and returned to his group, which appeared to include several foreign military officials and what looked like defense contractors. Sarah continued her inspection, making mental notes of several minor issues she wanted to discuss with the maintenance crew after her flights. As she completed her walk-around inspection, Sarah could hear the visitors talking among themselves. They were discussing the capabilities of the F-35, making comments about its advanced systems and stealth technology. Some of their observations were accurate, but others revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how the aircraft actually operated in combat situations. Sarah was particularly amused when one of them confidently explained to the others how the F-35 sensors worked, getting several key details completely wrong. She had spent countless hours studying every aspect of the aircraft's systems, and she knew the plane's capabilities better than most people who weren't actually qualified to fly it. When her crew chief approached with the final paperwork for the aircraft, the visiting officials assumed he was there to relieve Sarah of her duties so the real pilot could take over. They stepped back respectfully, clearly expecting someone else to arrive at any moment. The crew chief, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, had worked with Sarah many times before. He knew about her thorough inspection habits and respected her mechanical knowledge. "Everything look good, Captain?" he asked, using her rank in a way that should have clarified her role for anyone paying attention. "She found a minor sensor alignment issue on the left wing," Sarah replied, pointing to a small panel that was slightly askew. "Nothing that would affect today's missions, but it should be adjusted when we get back." Rodriguez nodded and made a note on his checklist. "I'll make sure the shop takes care of it. Your bird's ready to fly." "Ma'am." The visiting officials were still standing nearby, but they seemed to be engaged in their own conversation and didn't appear to notice the exchange between Sarah and her crew chief. They were probably waiting for what they assumed would be a more dramatic arrival by the actual pilot, complete with the kind of confident swagger that movies had taught them to expect from fighter pilots. Sarah gathered her helmet and other flight gear from the crew chief and began putting on her survival vest. The visitors continued to ignore her, focusing instead on taking pictures of the aircraft and discussing its specifications. She could have announced her identity and corrected their assumptions, but experience had taught her that such revelations often created more disruption than they were worth. As Sarah completed her pre-flight preparations, she noticed increased activity around the airfield. Ground crews were moving with unusual urgency, and she could see additional aircraft being prepared for departure. Her flight schedule had mentioned a large training exercise, but the level of activity suggested something more significant than routine training. Her radio crackled with a message from the Squadron Operations Center. "Ghost 27. Report to operations immediately for updated briefing materials." Sarah acknowledged the transmission and began walking toward the squadron building. The visiting officials watched her go, probably assuming she was heading off to find the pilot and let him know that his aircraft was ready. In the operations center, Sarah found her fellow pilots gathered around a large display screen that showed a map of the training area. The squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, was pointing to various positions on the map and explaining changes to the day's exercise scenario. "Listen up, people," Webb announced as Sarah entered the room. "We've got a more complex situation developing than originally planned. Intelligence indicates that our adversary forces have been reinforced with additional aircraft, and the scenario has been upgraded to simulate a more realistic threat environment." Sarah took her seat and reviewed the updated briefing materials. The exercise had originally been planned as a relatively straightforward training mission, involving 12 friendly aircraft against an equal number of simulated enemies. The new scenario involved nearly 40 aircraft on each side, with multiple waves of attacks and a much more complex tactical situation. "The good news," Webb continued, "is that this gives us an opportunity to test our pilots and aircraft under more realistic conditions. The bad news is that some of our scheduled pilots are unavailable due to a maintenance issue with their aircraft, so we're going to be running with a smaller force than originally planned." Sarah reviewed her mission assignment and noted that she would be flying as part of a 4-ship formation responsible for providing air-to-air coverage for the main strike package. It was exactly the kind of challenging mission she had trained for, and she felt the familiar excitement that came with the prospect of putting her skills to the test in a demanding scenario. After the briefing, Sarah returned to her aircraft to complete her final preparations. The visiting officials were still there, now accompanied by what appeared to be a senior officer who was explaining various aspects of the F-35's capabilities. Sarah noticed that their guide was providing much more accurate information than the earlier conversation she had overheard. As she approached her aircraft, Sarah could hear air raid sirens beginning to sound across the base. The exercise was officially beginning, and all personnel not directly involved in the training scenario were required to take shelter in designated areas. The visiting officials looked confused by the sudden change in activity, and their guide began herding them toward the nearest building. Sarah climbed into her aircraft and began the startup sequence. The F-35 systems came online with the smooth precision she had come to expect, each display and indicator confirming that her aircraft was ready for the demanding mission ahead. As she completed her systems checks, she could see other aircraft throughout the flight line beginning their own startup procedures, the radio filled with the controlled chatter of pilots and controllers coordinating the launch sequence. Sarah's formation was scheduled to depart in the second wave, giving her a few minutes to observe the first group of aircraft as they taxied toward the runway. As she waited for her turn to taxi, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From working in her father's garage to sitting in the cockpit of one of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft, she had overcome countless obstacles and proved herself at every step. Today's exercise would be another opportunity to demonstrate that skill and determination mattered more than preconceived notions about what a fighter pilot should look like. The tower controller's voice crackled through her headset. Ghost formation. Taxi for departure runway 27 left. Sarah released her brakes and began rolling toward the runway, ready to show everyone exactly what she was capable of achieving. The exercise began exactly as planned, with Sarah's four-ship formation launching into the clear Nevada sky as part of the larger training scenario. What nobody expected was that real enemy aircraft would somehow enter American airspace during what was supposed to be a routine training exercise. Sarah was flying at 28,000 feet, maintaining position as wingman to Major Tom Bradley, her flight lead. The desert landscape stretched endlessly below them, dotted with the geometric patterns of roads and settlements that looked like miniature models from their altitude. The morning sun cast sharp shadows across the mountains, creating a beautiful backdrop for what should have been a challenging but safe training mission. The first sign that something was wrong came through the radio chatter from the AWACS control aircraft. All players, be advised, we have unknown contacts approaching from the southwest. All exercise aircraft maintain current positions while we investigate. Sarah checked her radar display and noted several contacts that weren't part of the planned exercise scenario. The aircraft were approaching at high speed and didn't respond to radio calls from air traffic controllers. More concerning, their flight patterns didn't match any known training protocols. Ghost Lead, Ghost 2. Sarah called to Major Bradley. Are you seeing these unknowns on your scope? Confirmed, Ghost 2. Something's not right about this. Those aren't our exercise aircraft. The AWACS controller's voice came back on the radio, now with an unmistakable note of urgency. All exercise participants, exercise terminated. Repeat, exercise terminated. Unknown aircraft have entered restricted airspace and are not responding to identification requests. Within seconds, the radio frequency exploded with activity. Controllers were vectoring the training aircraft away from the unknowns, while scrambling additional interceptors from other bases. Sarah could hear the tension in everyone's voices as what had been a routine training day suddenly became a potential real-world threat. All Ghost Flight aircraft. This is Nella's control, came the voice of the base controller. Vector north and maintain current altitude. Stand by for further instructions. Sarah followed Major Bradley as their formation turned away from the approaching unknowns. She kept her radar active, monitoring the developing situation while trying to understand what was happening. The unknown aircraft were now clearly visible on everyone's scopes, flying in formation and maintaining course directly toward the training area. The situation deteriorated rapidly when the unknown aircraft suddenly accelerated and began climbing toward the altitude where the American training aircraft were operating. Radio intercepts revealed that the intruders were speaking in a foreign language and coordinating what appeared to be an attack on the American aircraft. Ghost Flight, we have a problem, came the urgent voice of the AWACS controller. Unknown aircraft have locked onto Falcon Flight and appear to be in attack position. All available aircraft, we need immediate assistance. Sarah watched her radar display as the situation unfolded in real time. The unknown aircraft had somehow gotten close enough to the training aircraft to achieve targeting solutions, and it was clear they had hostile intentions. This was no longer an exercise or a case of lost civilian aircraft wandering into restricted airspace. Ghost lead, request permission to engage. Major Bradley called to the AWACS controller. Ghost lead, you are cleared to engage hostile aircraft. Weapons free. Repeat, weapons free. Sarah felt her heart rate spike as the gravity of the situation hit her. She was about to engage in real combat against aircraft that had somehow penetrated deep into American airspace. Every hour of training, every simulation, every drill had been preparing her for this moment, but the reality felt surreal. Ghost flight. Turn left heading 220 and descend to Angels 20, Bradley commanded. We're going to come in from the side and try to get behind them. Sarah followed her flight lead through the tactical maneuver, her F-35's advanced sensors providing detailed information about the enemy aircraft. As they got closer, she could see that the unknowns were flying sophisticated fighter jets that she didn't immediately recognize. They were definitely military aircraft, not civilian planes that had wandered off course. The enemy formation consisted of 12 aircraft flying in 3 groups of 4. They had already engaged 2 of the American training aircraft, and Sarah could see missile trails on her display as the air battle began in earnest. The American pilots were fighting back, but they had been caught by surprise and were at a tactical disadvantage. Ghost 2, take the left group, Bradley ordered. I'll handle the center formation. Sarah acknowledged and selected her targets. The enemy aircraft were flying older generation fighters, but they were being flown aggressively by pilots who clearly knew what they were doing. She would need to use every advantage her F-35 could provide to survive the engagement. As Sarah closed to within missile range, her aircraft systems automatically identified and prioritized targets. The F-35's advanced radar and sensor fusion gave her a complete picture of the tactical situation, showing her exactly where each enemy aircraft was located and what they were doing. She fired her first AIM-120 missile at the lead aircraft in the enemy formation. The missile guided perfectly, striking the target and causing it to explode in a brilliant fireball. Sarah immediately turned her attention to the second aircraft, which was maneuvering aggressively to avoid the fate of its leader. The enemy pilot was skilled, pulling his aircraft through violent turns and using chaff and flares to confuse Sarah's targeting systems. But Sarah had spent years training for exactly this type of engagement, and her F-35's superior technology gave her advantages that the enemy pilot couldn't match. She maneuvered her aircraft to maintain the tactical advantage while setting up for her second shot. The enemy pilot tried to turn the tables by launching his own missile, but Sarah had anticipated the move and was already maneuvering to defeat the incoming weapon. Sarah's second missile found its target, and another enemy aircraft fell burning toward the desert below. She immediately began scanning for additional threats, knowing that the other enemy aircraft would be looking for revenge against whoever had just eliminated 2 of their formation. The radio was filled with the intense chatter of multiple air battles happening simultaneously across the training area. American pilots were engaging enemy aircraft at various altitudes and locations, with the outcome of individual battles changing by the second. Ghost 2, you've got 2 bandits coming up from your 6 o'clock, warned one of the other American pilots. Sarah looked at her displays and confirmed that 2 enemy aircraft had maneuvered behind her and were closing rapidly. She would need to use all her flying skills to avoid their missiles while positioning herself for counterattacks. She pulled her F-35 into a steep climb, using the aircraft's exceptional thrust-to-weight ratio to gain altitude rapidly, while turning to present a difficult target for the pursuing enemy fighters. The enemy pilots followed, but their older aircraft couldn't match the F-35's performance in the vertical plane. Sarah reversed her climb at the top of her maneuver and dove back toward the enemy aircraft, now attacking from above with a significant energy advantage. She selected her third target and fired, watching the missile streak toward the enemy fighter at incredible speed. The enemy pilot never had a chance to react. The missile struck his aircraft in the center fuselage, breaking it in half and sending burning pieces tumbling toward the ground below. Sarah immediately turned her attention to the fourth enemy aircraft, which was now trying desperately to escape. The pilot had realized he was outmatched and was attempting to flee toward the southern border, but Sarah's F-35 was faster and had better sensors. She pursued the fleeing aircraft at high speed, closing the distance rapidly while maintaining perfect tactical positioning. When she reached optimal missile range, she fired her fourth weapon of the engagement. This missile also found its target, eliminating the last aircraft from the enemy formation that had been assigned to her. In less than 10 minutes of combat, Sarah had successfully engaged and destroyed 4 enemy fighters without taking any damage to her own aircraft. Ghost 2. Good shooting, came Major Bradley's voice over the radio. I got 3 from the center group, but we still have multiple bandits in the area. Sarah checked her fuel and weapons status. She still had enough fuel for continued operations and several missiles remaining. Around her, the air battle continued as other American pilots engaged the remaining enemy aircraft. Ghost 2, this is Falcon Lead, came a new voice on the radio. I've got 2 bandits on my tail and I'm running low on options. Can you assist? Sarah looked at her tactical display and located Falcon Lead's position. The pilot was being pursued by 2 enemy aircraft and was flying a training aircraft that wasn't equipped with the same advanced weapons and defensive systems as her F-35. Falcon-led Ghost 2 is inbound to assist. Continue your current heading, and I'll take them from the side. Sarah turned toward the new engagement, pushing her F-35 to maximum speed. The advanced engine responded instantly, accelerating her aircraft far beyond what the enemy fighters could achieve. She arrived at the engagement area just as the enemy aircraft were closing in for what would have been killing shots on the American training aircraft. Sarah fired 2 missiles in rapid succession, both finding their targets and eliminating the threat to Falcon Lead. The American training aircraft was able to escape safely while Sarah scanned for additional enemy aircraft that might need her attention. The air battle was beginning to wind down as American reinforcements arrived from other bases and the surviving enemy aircraft found themselves heavily outnumbered. Several of the intruders attempted to flee, but most were intercepted and destroyed before they could escape American airspace. All American aircraft. This is AWACS, came the controller's voice. Initial count shows 8 enemy aircraft remaining. Continue the engagement until all hostiles are eliminated or have departed American airspace. Sarah continued flying combat air patrol, looking for any remaining enemy aircraft that might pose a threat. Her fuel was getting lower, but she still had enough for several more minutes of combat operations. She spotted one last enemy aircraft trying to escape at low altitude, flying through a mountain canyon in an attempt to avoid radar detection. Sarah dove down to intercept, using her aircraft's advanced sensors to track the enemy through the difficult terrain. The final engagement was brief. The enemy pilot realized he had been detected and tried to fight, but he was alone against Sarah's superior aircraft and training. Her last missile of the day found its target, bringing her total to 8 enemy aircraft destroyed in a single mission. As Sarah climbed back to altitude, the AWACS controller announced that all enemy aircraft had been eliminated or driven from American airspace. The mysterious attack was over, but questions about who the attackers were and how they had penetrated so deeply into American territory would remain unanswered for weeks to come. The landing at Nellis Air Force Base after the engagement was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her career. As she taxied her F-35 back to the parking area, she could see crowds of people gathered around the flight line. News crews, base personnel, visiting officials, and what appeared to be senior military leadership from across the region had assembled to witness the return of the aircraft that had just fought the first air battle over American soil since World War II. Sarah shut down her aircraft and completed her post-flight checks with the same methodical precision she had used before takeoff. Her hands were steady, but she could feel the adrenaline still coursing through her system from the intense combat engagement. 8 enemy aircraft destroyed in a single mission was unprecedented in modern air combat, especially for a pilot who had never seen real combat before today. As she climbed down from her aircraft, Sarah was met by her crew chief, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, whose face showed a mixture of pride and amazement. "Captain, that was incredible," he said, his voice filled with emotion. 8 confirmed kills in one mission. I've been working on fighters for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like it. Sarah removed her helmet and ran her hand through her sweat-dampened hair. The aircraft performed flawlessly. Rodriguez, your maintenance work made all the difference. The crowd of officials and media personnel was growing larger by the minute, but most of them were still focused on interviewing other pilots and trying to understand the bigger picture of what had happened. Sarah's small stature and unassuming appearance allowed her to move relatively unnoticed through the initial chaos. Lieutenant Colonel Webb, her squadron commander, approached with a serious expression on his face. "Sarah, I need you to come with me immediately. There are a lot of people who want to talk with you, including some very senior leadership from Washington." As they walked toward the squadron building, Webb explained what had been learned about the attack. Intelligence is still putting together the full picture, but it appears we were targeted by a coordinated strike from an unknown adversary. They somehow managed to penetrate our air defense systems and get 12 fighters deep into American airspace before anyone realized what was happening. Sarah listened carefully as Webb continued the briefing. The attack was sophisticated and well-planned. If they had succeeded in eliminating our training aircraft, they could have caused significant casualties and sent a message that our airspace isn't as secure as we thought. Inside the squadron building, Sarah found herself in a room full of people she had never seen before. There were officers wearing the stars of general rank, civilians in expensive suits who were obviously from Washington, and technical experts who immediately began asking detailed questions about her aircraft's performance during the engagement. "Captain Chen," said a 3-star general whom Sarah recognized from photos as the commander of Air Combat Command. "What you accomplished today was extraordinary. 8 confirmed air-to-air kills in a single engagement is a record that hasn't been matched since World War II. Sarah stood at attention and tried to process the magnitude of what she was hearing. "Sir, I was just doing my job. The F-35 systems and my training prepared me for exactly this type of situation." A woman in a business suit stepped forward and introduced herself as a representative from the Pentagon. "Captain, we're going to need a detailed debrief of every aspect of your engagement. Your experience today will help us understand both the capabilities of the aircraft and the tactics used by our adversaries." For the next 4 hours, Sarah found herself in the most comprehensive debriefing of her life. Every detail of the engagement was examined, from her initial detection of the enemy aircraft to the final missile shot. Technical experts analyzed data from her aircraft's sensors and weapon systems, while intelligence officers tried to piece together information about the attacking force. The most surprising revelation came when analysts compared radar tracks and missile camera footage. Sarah's targets had been flying aircraft that weren't supposed to exist in the inventories of any potential adversary. The technology was advanced, suggesting a level of military capability that had been previously unknown to American intelligence services. "Captain Chen," said the intelligence officer leading that portion of the debrief, "your engagement provided us with the first detailed look at aircraft and tactics that we didn't know existed. The performance data from your mission will be invaluable for understanding this new threat." As evening approached, Sarah finally had a chance to step outside and get some fresh air. The initial chaos around the flight line had died down somewhat, but she could still see news crews and officials discussing the day's events. The story was already spreading across news networks and social media, though most reports focused on the broader implications of the attack, rather than individual pilot performance. Sarah was surprised to find the group of visiting civilians from that morning still on base. They were standing near the flight line, apparently waiting for transportation back to their hotels. The same man who had spoken to her before the mission approached her again, but his attitude was completely different. "Excuse me, Captain," he said, reading her name tape and rank insignia carefully. "I believe we spoke this morning before your flight. I had no idea you were the pilot who—" He paused, clearly struggling to find the right words. "It's quite all right," Sarah replied. "People often make assumptions about who does what around here. It's really not a problem." The man extended his hand. "I'm James Mitchell from Lockheed Martin. I've been working with F-35 systems for over 10 years. But what you accomplished today demonstrates capabilities we could only theorize about. Would it be possible to discuss your experience with the aircraft's performance during combat operations?" Sarah spent several more minutes talking with the visitors, who were now extremely interested in her insights about the F-35's combat effectiveness. They had been on base to observe routine training exercises, but instead had witnessed the first real combat engagement of the aircraft against a sophisticated adversary. Over the following days, Sarah found herself at the center of intense media attention and military analysis. Her achievement of 8 air-to-air victories in a single engagement made her the first American ace pilot of the modern era and placed her among the most successful fighter pilots in aviation history. The Pentagon released carefully edited video footage from her aircraft's cameras, showing several of the missile engagements. The precision and effectiveness of her tactics impressed military analysts around the world and provided clear evidence of the F-35's superior capabilities in air-to-air combat. What impressed observers even more was Sarah's calm professionalism throughout the engagement. Radio recordings revealed a pilot who remained focused and tactical even under the extreme stress of multiple simultaneous combats against unknown adversaries. The investigation into the attack continued for months, eventually revealing a complex plot by a hostile nation to test American air defenses and potentially eliminate a significant number of American pilots during what should have been a routine training exercise. The attack had been carefully planned to coincide with the large-scale training event, when multiple aircraft would be airborne and potentially vulnerable. Sarah's exceptional performance had not only prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of American aircraft and pilots, but had also provided intelligence services with crucial information about previously unknown enemy capabilities. Her detailed debriefings helped military planners understand new threats and develop countermeasures for future encounters. The recognition that followed was overwhelming. Sarah received the Medal of Honor in a ceremony at the White House, making her one of the few pilots ever to receive the nation's highest military decoration for aerial combat. The president praised her courage and skill, noting that her actions had prevented a significant military disaster and protected American lives. Major defense contractors studied Sarah's engagement extensively, using the data to improve aircraft systems and weapons effectiveness. Her experience demonstrated that the combination of advanced technology and exceptional pilot training could overcome numerical disadvantages and sophisticated enemy tactics. Military flight schools incorporated Sarah's engagement into their curriculum as a case study of effective air combat tactics. Her ability to manage multiple simultaneous engagements while maintaining tactical awareness became a model for training future fighter pilots. Perhaps most importantly for Sarah personally, the assumptions and skepticism she had faced throughout her career finally disappeared. Her achievement was impossible to dismiss or minimize, and it opened doors for other pilots who might not fit traditional expectations about what a fighter pilot should look like. Sarah continued flying with the aggressor squadron, now as a major and eventually as a squadron commander. Her experience became legendary within the fighter pilot community, and young pilots sought her guidance on tactics and aircraft employment. The attack on American airspace remained an isolated incident, but the lessons learned from Sarah's engagement influenced military planning and aircraft development for years to come. Her detailed analysis of the F-35's performance in combat led to improvements in training programs and tactical development. Years later, when Sarah looked back on that September morning, she remembered not just the intensity of the combat engagement, but also the moment when assumptions about her role and capabilities were finally shattered forever. The visitors who had mistaken her for maintenance staff that morning learned that the most capable pilot on the base had been standing right in front of them, preparing to demonstrate exactly what she could accomplish when given the opportunity. Sarah's story became an inspiration for military personnel around the world, proving that skill, determination, and preparation could overcome any obstacle or prejudice. Her achievement demonstrated that excellence in military aviation had nothing to do with appearance or preconceptions, and everything to do with the dedication and professionalism that she had brought to every aspect of her career. The 8 enemy aircraft Sarah destroyed that day represented more than just a remarkable military achievement. They symbolized the destruction of barriers and assumptions that had limited opportunities for capable people throughout military history. Her success opened pathways for future generations of pilots who would be judged solely on their ability to perform when their country needed them most. In the end, Sarah Chen's extraordinary day above the Nevada desert proved that the most important qualities of a fighter pilot couldn't be seen from the outside. Courage, skill, tactical intelligence, and the ability to perform under extreme pressure were the characteristics that truly mattered when everything was on the line. Those qualities had nothing to do with height, appearance, or preconceived notions about who belonged in the cockpit of a fighter aircraft. Sarah's legacy continued to inspire new generations of military pilots, reminding them that their capabilities would ultimately be measured not by how others perceived them, but by what they could accomplish when their skills and determination were put to the ultimate test.